Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettled by Ryan Hampton. The subtitle is How the Purdue Pharma Bankruptcy Failed the Victims of the American Overdose Crisis. And this is from the introduction. August 17th, 2018. Thick thunderclouds darkened the horizon, turning the beautiful Stamford, Connecticut sky from blue to nearly black. Within moments, my shirt was soaked with sweat as the August humidity crept down my collar. I heard the voices before I even got to the Purdue Pharma building. As I pulled into a parking spot, my ears started to ring. The shouting grew louder as I hustled through the glittering monolith on Tresser Boulevard. The police were already here, shielding the front of the building in a blockade formation. Hundreds of people crowded the plaza. The noise hit me like a wall, and I stumbled as I went into the press of bodies, working my way forward. The ground was covered in shreds of paper, protest messages that people were stuffing into orange plastic pill bottles and leaving on the steps. The officers didn't move. Locked in place, they were there to back Purdue. Standing in the shadow of the building, my sweat turned to ice water. I looked up, craning my neck to take in the whole monstrosity. One Stamford Forum was the mother ship. 10 floors of glass windows and dark chrome reflecting the coming storm down at us. It felt nearly abandoned, even on a Friday afternoon when people should have been coming and going to their jobs. The stillness was eerie, as though the building were listening to us, planning its next move. I felt as if I were looking up at the Death Star for the first time. That's no moon. One Stamford wasn't just a corporate office. It was a national monument to American greed. The 505,000 square foot building at 201 Tresser was stuffed with Purdue offices. This was ground zero. Inside these walls, the Sackler family-owned company had run the numbers, drawn up marketing plans, and executed their strategies. The company committed cold-blooded corporate genocide, rubber-stamped by the FDA and co-signed by the free market. More blood had been spilled in that building than I could comprehend. My stomach clenched with nausea. I felt as if I were standing at the gates of hell. On the third floor, in one of the lacquered panes that overlooked the plaza, I could see figures standing at the window. 3 or 4 people clustered together, holding their phones and pointing down at the crowd. I narrowed my eyes. They were taping us. They were laughing. I'd tear the place to pieces, with my own hands if necessary. My voice joined the chant that swelled around me. The protest was a furious hurricane, filling the plaza and battering the windows of the Purdue building. I'll end them, I thought to myself. If it's the last thing I do, I will take this place down along with everything it ever stood for. I got the phone call a year later on a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon in September 2019. It was the long Labor Day weekend, and I was at the Bronx Zoo with my 2 favorite people for a last-minute vacation. I let go of my fiance's hand to answer the phone. Sean, who was used to work interrupting our dates and outings, smiled at me and turned away to talk to my mom. They pointed at the red parkas in the nearest enclosure while I pressed my phone to my ear. Purdue's filing for bankruptcy, the voice on the other end said. Yeah, whatever. I got a lot of calls like this. Everyone had a theory about Purdue, and information spread like wildfire between advocates, reporters, and lobbyists. A lot of it was old news by the time it got to me. We all knew the same stuff because we'd worked tirelessly to take down Purdue and bring them to justice for encouraging and profiting off a national drug epidemic that had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. No, it's really happening, she said. What I learned in that phone call altered the course of almost 2 years of my life, although it felt like 20. I didn't know what it meant, but by the time I hung up and turned back to Sean and my mom, the gears of history were turning at lightning speed. Within 2 weeks, Purdue Pharma did file for bankruptcy. Before I knew it, I was in a room packed with every person I'd ever squared off with. That day was the last calm moment I experienced for the next 22 months. Life before the Purdue case wasn't exactly smooth sailing, but I navigated the waves with some help from my partner and my friends. I wasn't new to being a disruptor, but I was about to be catapulted to a level of involvement I hadn't imagined was possible for people such as me. Previously, I'd worked to support a range of policy issues and devoted countless hours to advance forward-thinking addiction recovery legislation. I knew what the numbers were in the crisis. I saw firsthand how addiction tore families apart, destroyed entire communities, and killed our most vulnerable people. In the first years of my recovery, I lost more than 24 friends to preventable overdoses. I visited dozens of communities as part of a documentary project in 2016 called Addiction X America, and witnessed the losses sustained by ordinary families everywhere. I stayed in homes with parents who'd lost children to Purdue Pharma's best-selling painkiller, OxyContin. I ate at the tables of families that would never be the same. I vowed that I would bring justice to them and all the people who, like myself, had lost years of their lives to Purdue's rapacious hunger for profits. I told these stories in testimony I delivered to Congress, in front of thousands of people calling for change, and at the gates of institutions with the Sackler family name emblazoned over them. I wrote my first book, American Fix, Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It, which was published in 2018. I talked about the crisis on MSNBC, Fox News, and any other outlet that would listen to me. The book is Unsettled by Ryan Hampton. It's by a guy that Louise and I have met. I want to tell you about that this hour. In our second hour, pick up the pen, Joe. The fascinating little glimpse into the actual law about student debt and the power that the president or the Secretary of Education, Michael Cardona, has. We'll talk about that. Also, Ron DeSantis, who has spent his last few weeks describing basically LGBTQ people as predators or groomers. Turns out he's trying to help Matt Gaetz get away with paying underage girls for sex. It's very weird. We'll get into that in the second hour. In our third hour, Alex Lawson is going to drop by from Social Security Works and give us the latest on the privatization threats to Medicare. And we've got an amazing geeky science for you in the third hour of the program today, why asthmatics are less susceptible to severe COVID. But the headline for the piece that I wrote for today's HartmannReport.com is titled, Democrats Should Take on the Swamp and Mean It. And what I'm talking about that, when I say the swamp, I'm talking about corruption. Corruption is the most powerful political word in the English language, and it's the most powerful political word in any language. The reason why Alexei Navalny is rotting in a jail cell is because when he challenged Vladimir Putin for the presidency of Russia, he did it pointing out Putin's corruption. He's the guy who got the film crew together, who went and found Putin's billion-dollar dacha, wherever it is, his mansion that he had built, and all the yachts and all this stuff. And they did a whole, they've got this thing called the Anti-Corruption Group. It's got a name very similar to that in Russia. And they're continuing the work, by the way. But he's rotting in jail because Putin knows how powerful the word corruption is. Democrats need to learn from this. Right? I mean, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, when he ran for office the first time, he ran on ending corruption in Brazil. In fact, he said, and I quote, "The evils and harms of corruption affect the population in any way. This is what we want to stop. A corrupt government stimulates crime in all areas," which, by the way, is true. Volodymyr Zelensky is the president of Ukraine because he ran an anti-corruption campaign. He didn't overthrow the guy who was Yanukovych, who Paul Manafort had helped put into power in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. And then Yanukovych, of course, stopped the whole process back in, I think it was, 2009? I forget the year, but back there in that neighborhood of time, it was Yanukovych who said, "Oh, no, we don't need to join NATO." And, of course, his strings were being pulled by Paul Manafort, who was working on behalf of Russian oligarchs, presumably including Putin. And then Manafort comes to the United States in 2016 and volunteers for free to run Donald Trump's campaign. Gee, what a surprise. Anyhow, Zelensky ran against the corruption of Petro Poroshenko, who was, another reasonably, he was sort of like a Republican. He was not a Putin toady, but he was in with the oligarchs, shall we say. And Zelensky, bopped him out of office by talking about corruption. Donald Trump ran on being opposed to corruption in 2016. This is an amazing story. I mean, when Louise and I lived in D.C. during the 2016 election, we knew a number of people socially who were military or ex-military. I mean, they're all over the place in D.C., right? And And some of them were people that, we would occasionally hang out with. And the thing that amazed me was how many of them were eager to vote for either Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. Why? Because they felt that the government had become corrupt. And they wanted to have, somebody from the outside who was going to come in and shake things up. In fact, back right after the 2016 election, in March or April of 2017, a reporter for Huffington Post, John Hotchkiss, put together a fake Facebook account and then used that account to join a whole bunch of pro-Trump groups, about 50 different pro-Trump groups. And after he had, established his, yes, I'm a Trump humper here in these 50 groups, he put together a meme in which he asked a very simple question. What do you like about President Trump? I'm quoting from his article in Huffington Post, quote, I got more than 1,000 responses in 24 hours, and the thing people wrote most is that they like Trump because he's not a politician. He's a real American, not corrupted by Washington and beholden to no one. Trump ran on an anti-corruption campaign. Remember, in 2015, he was on the stage with all these other Republicans, and he said, and I quote, they will be bombarded by their lobbyists that donated a lot of money to them. Again, Jeb raised $107 million, okay? They're not putting that money up because it's a wonderful charity. Well, it is a charity, but for them, not for Americans. And he says, so their lobbyists, their special interests, their donors will start calling President Bush and saying pretty much whoever's president other than me. And they'll say, you have to do it. He gave you $1 million for your campaign, $2 million, $5 million. And the plant will be built in Mexico. And that's how we just lost all the plants all over the country. This is Donald, and end of quote. That's Donald Trump back in 2015, wiping the floor of the most powerful Republicans in the United States and the most well-funded and the most well-known Republicans, Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush. I mean, Chris Christie knocked them all out one after the other. So, after that, of course, Trump assembled the most corrupt cabinet in the history of the United States. His attorney general was so corrupt he wouldn't even tell us what Robert Mueller came up with. He put a fossil fuel lobbyist in charge of the Interior Department. He put a coal lobbyist in charge of the EPA. He put the Transportation Department under the oversight of Elaine Chao, whose family's worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the shipping industry. That's, by the way, regulated by the Transportation Department. He put Wilbur Ross, a billionaire that Forbes magazine calls a grifter, in charge of the Commerce Department, where he had access to all kinds of inside information. I mean, he put, fascists and criminals like Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn into the heart of our political system. I mean, and the only consequential piece of legislation in 4 years that Trump passed was an insanely corrupt $2.5 trillion tax cut for his billionaire buddies. Which brings us to the point that you can only run successfully on ending corruption once. Jair Bolsonaro did it in Brazil, and now he's running for re-election. And guess what? He's not mentioning corruption anymore. He can't. Instead, what he's doing is voter suppression. In Brazil, the Republican Party ran on anti-corruption once in 2016. They can't do it again. What are they doing now? Voter suppression in the United States. To stay in power, if you get in power, using anti-corruption, there's two ways to hold power. One is to continue being against corruption. Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine created a government agency to end corruption in the federal government of Ukraine. If you're truly opposed to corruption, walk the talk. Zelensky did that. The Republicans didn't do that. Bolsonaro didn't do that, but Democrats can and should do that. Normally if you talk about an issue, say healthcare, people will say, oh, well, you're taking the Democratic or the Republican position? Or student debt, or voting rights, or inflation, or whatever. Labor, green energy, you name it, immigration. As soon as you put a party frame around it, you've got people from the other party saying, no way, I'm not going to support you in this. But if you put a corruption frame around it instead, everything changes. There is no partisanship when you mention corruption. So to expand health care, Democrats should be talking about their Republican opponents being corrupt toadies, stooges of the insurance industry. On ending student debt, they should point out that their Republican opponents are toadies for the corrupt bankers who are making billions in profit off student debt. On voting rights, they should point out that the Republicans are rigging the system corruptly so that they can wallow in the big bucks that their donors shower on them. On inflation, they can frame the issue as Republicans refusing to do anything about companies that exploit the pandemic and the war in Ukraine to rip off consumers. On labor, they can tell the story of how the Republican Party has been fighting against the right to unionize ever since 1935 without a pause. And it went on steroids in 1981 when Reagan declared the war on working people by busting up Patco. On green energy in Oregon, the guy who voted against Medicare being able to negotiate drug prices, he's now saying he's not going to take any more money from the Koch brothers or from Charles Koch and his foundations and his groups. It's a start, right? We've got Manchin and Sinema. Everybody knows, Sinema's taking money from Big Pharma. Manchin's taking money from fossil fuels. And so they're blowing up, good legislation. Well, let's do something about that, though. Let's elect some genuine progressive Democrats to the United States Senate. And there are some running this fall so that we can get a large enough majority and then the Democratic Party needs to commit itself to ending corruption in its own party, as well as across the board.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is an electoral strategy that Republicans will not be able to defeat. What say you? And welcome back. Saber in West Covina, California. Hey, Saber, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I love the show.
Thank you.
And I wanted your opinion on this poll that came out. It's called the Harvard Caps Harris poll. It shows Trump leading Biden in a 2024 matchup, 47% to 41%, and Trump leading Harris 49% to 38%. And how anybody can lose to Trump after all that's happened is beyond me.
Yeah.
But I wanted your opinion on this.
I'm astonished that Trump still has, a base of support, and this is, frankly, I think this is going to be a real crisis, Saber, for the Republican Party, because increasingly Trump is collapsing. His crimes are being outed. Congress is going after him. The Justice Department is going after him. You got two different states that are going after him, New York and Georgia. He will be a martyr, but I think that he has the potential to split the Republican Party. In fact, he's doing it right now, to split the Republican Party in half, which could be really, really good news for Democrats this fall and in 2024. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I seriously doubt that Donald Trump is going to run for president again. Now, that said, I didn't think that Donald Trump was going to win in 2016 either. And obviously, he lost by 3 million votes in the popular vote, so my instincts were right at least. But what does it say to you, Saber? What's your take on it?
It says to me that frankly, Biden's not passing enough progressive legislation. I think if he legalized marijuana, canceled student loan debt, maybe even if he expunged the records of those in jail for nonviolent drug crimes, the numbers would look a lot better.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that when, we do these surveys, or survey companies are constantly doing these surveys of, what do you think of Biden's job performance? And very rarely do they go granular enough to ask why. What are the specific issues? And my sense of it, and maybe I'm wrong on this, and the thing that might cause me to be wrong on this is what I was talking about yesterday, about how relentless the media has been at ignoring the incredible successes that the Biden administration has had economically so far, and instead focusing on the few narrow areas like inflation where things seem to be a little bit out of control. That would be the caveat. But my sense of it is that the main reason why people say, no, I'm not satisfied with Joe Biden is because Donald Trump is not yet in jail. And because we still have student debt, and because we don't have Medicare for all, and because basically, the corruption is still ruling in many ways in the United States. Now, granted, most of this is the result of Republican obstruction, but there are a few Democrats in on that too. I think if Manchin and Sinema had not blocked the filibuster, or had not supported the filibuster that blocked the passage of the Build Back Better legislation, you would see, or the voting rights legislation, you would see a much, much, much more favorable landscape for Democrats in this 2022 and 2024 elections. It would blow up the Republicans' ability to do voter suppression, and it would be delivering stuff to the public right now in a big way. But, hey, we've got a couple of corrupt senators on our side, too, and we need to own that and do something about it. Saber, I got to run, but thanks a lot for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with this amazing crazy alert and Bernie Sanders and the labor movement right after this. And then we'll get to your calls. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. They often say that Republican Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, is the stupidest guy in the entire United States Senate. I get it. Tommy Tuberville gives him a run for his money, but he just came out with what has to be at least the very stupidest idea of the year. Ron Johnson is proposing, there's a shortage of child care workers right now in America. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for that. But he has proposed a solution. His suggestion: any woman in America who's getting any kind of public assistance, you're getting food stamps, you're getting, tuition relief, whatever it may be, you would be forced to go into daycare centers and care for children. Yeah, seriously. This is Ron Johnson's idea. People who had no training, and one of his assistants said, well, it's just like teachers who teach at public schools where their own kids attend. No, it's not. These are not trained professionals. There's no union. This is nuts. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. All righty, Bernie Sanders comes out and says, okay, this is it. We're going to do something here. Starbucks and Amazon both starting to unionize. Howard Schultz has come back into Starbucks because he's, the great union buster, or at least he thinks he is. I mean, we'll see how this plays out. This was on Monday. Schultz said the Starbucks is being assaulted in many ways by the threat of unionization. Right. And of course, Jeff Bezos going after the unions over at Amazon. So Bernie comes out and he says, while the billionaire class is becoming much, much richer, real weekly wages for American workers are $40 lower today than they were 49 years ago. That would be when Reagan started his war on working people. In fact, Sanders continued, during that period, there's been a massive transfer of wealth from the working class and middle class of our country to the top 1%. And he cited the statistic that this was a recent analysis done by an economics group, that $50 trillion in wealth. The middle class in America used to be incredibly wealthy prior to the Reagan administration. $50 trillion was taken from the bottom 90% and put into the pockets of the top 1% between 1975 and 2018. We have now 700 billionaires in the United States who added $1.7 trillion to their money bins just during the pandemic. Today, Sanders said, multi-billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson are off taking joyrides on rocket ships to outer space, buying $500 million super yachts, and living in mansions with 25 bathrooms. And let's be clear, it's not just income and wealth inequality, it's economic and political power. According to one recent study, the corporate assault on unions over the past decade, I'm quoting here from a piece over at Common Dreams about Bernie, over the past 4 decades has cost the median U.S. worker $3,250 a year. That's just the anti-union activity. Amazon spent $4.3 million on anti-union consultants. They're going to, everybody's celebrating that Staten Island just unionized Amazon warehouse. Amazon is, in all probability, going to appeal that. Sanders says, on the one hand, there's a growing movement toward oligarchy in which a small number of incredibly wealthy and powerful billionaires own and control a significant part of the economy and exert enormous influence over the political life of our country. On the other hand, in opposition to oligarchy and corporate greed, there is a movement of working people and young people who in ever-increasing numbers are fighting for justice in a way that we have not seen in years. Amen. Crazy alert after this, and then your phone calls. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Yep, still here and fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been screaming bloody murder to watch them die, end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level, end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturer's lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, I just had this crazy alert. It's just crazy. And I got to tell you a story about this. A California man murdered his two children. He drove them down to Mexico, shot them with a spear gun, and left their bodies by the side of the road. He was the owner of a Christian school in Santa Barbara, and he said that the reason he killed them was because he believed they had lizard DNA. And now he's come out and identified the source of his belief. And this is where it gets really weird. This must have been 30, 40 years ago, a long time ago. So long ago, I don't remember what city it was in or even if it was in the United States or in the United Kingdom. But Louise and I went to this conference. I was speaking there about something. I don't recall the topic now. Probably the last hours of ancient sunlight. But in any case, we were at this conference that I was speaking at, and we decided to go to some of the breakout sessions. And there was this one where this guy with a British accent was giving a lecture on the history of the world. It was something called like the true history of the world. And it was a 2-hour lecture. Or maybe it was just an hour, whatever it was. Anyhow, the first half of the lecture, he was talking about, the rise of secret societies and how the Masons came about and how there was a similar movement in ancient Egypt and their symbology, and George Washington was sworn in a Masonic parade and all this stuff that I already knew and I knew was true. But most of the people in the room obviously were kind of blown away by it. People were really following this guy. I mean, super attentive. And then he starts getting into how there are among us, the people who have been running these secret societies, are actually people who have reptilian DNA. They're called archons, and they have created a genetically modified human that has some of their lizard DNA in it. And by the end of his talk, he was getting into how Bill Clinton was president at the time, this must have been in the 90s, how Bill Clinton every morning gets up and zips on his human suit. I'm not making this stuff up. Well, that guy was David Icke, or Ike, I-C-K-E. And now this guy from California, he says, yeah, it's that British guy with white hair. And Vice News is reporting Ike's core beliefs center on an interdimensional race of reptilian beings called Archons who have invaded Earth and created a genetically modified human Archon hybrid race of shape-shifting reptilians known variously as the Babylonian Brotherhood, the Illuminati, or simply the Elite. According to Ike, this group manipulates global events, including the climate crisis, wars, and the COVID-19 pandemic, keeping the human population living in fear so the Archons can feed off the resulting negative energy. I'm telling you, I sat in the room and listened to this guy, or a clone of him, 30 years ago or thereabouts. And it's amazing. Okay, anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. There's a lot that we've got on the table here. Joel in Joliet, Illinois. Hey, Joel, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how are you?
I'm well.
Hey, I haven't talked to you in a while, but I've been busy writing a book I want to rant about. I believe my book can convert 15 to 25% of red voters. It sounds heavy.
Wait a minute, you're assuming red voters read books?
Yes.
Okay,
well,
that may be dangerous.
If it's promoted and politicians start talking, I think it's a go.
Okay.
Well, the first question to start with, why is everyone fighting an inside-out world war in their head? Well, if you start a conversation with grown-up assumptions, you'll have both feet standing firmly in midair. But if you break it down, a conversation to third-grade simple facts, answers come alive. I explain this in a book I wrote, Life is Third Grade Simple. It's the grown-ups that keep forking things up, which is available on Amazon. I explain how did America come to this. Back in the day, there were two villains, politicians and corporations. They needed more control over the little black and white pawns.
Joel, instead of reading this to me, I get it that you wanted to plug your book, and you did that. Is there a point that you're trying to make beyond that?
Yeah, because what people don't get is the trick that politicians and corporations, they teamed up in 96 with hate media in 96. They become what I call try-hate us. Try-hate us. It's try-hate us against the American pawns, us.
Yeah.
So the trick that they do is they have a pickup truck. Imagine a pickup truck. You got a politician driving, hate media in the center, and you got corporations in a passenger seat. Behind their truck, they're pulling a long rope, and there's all these decoy cans tied onto it. And each decoy can is labeled CRT, 1619, don't say gay, transgender. These are decoys reinforced.
No, I totally get it, Joel, and good luck on your book. Spot on. I can't disagree with your point. Daryl in Townsend, Delaware. Hey, Daryl, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's up?
Long-time listener, first-time caller. I appreciate you. I heard on Tom. I was wondering if you heard on Tom. On Joe Madison this morning. This Trump supporter was asked, I believe, by a reporter, who she would vote for, Joe Biden or Putin, and she said Putin, and then she said that Putin has or the Russian people have been the bad guy ever since after World War II.
Yeah.
And
I didn't hear it on Joe's show. I missed his show this morning, although it's really don't miss radio. I mean, Joe Madison does some of the best radio in the country. But I did miss his show this morning. But I have seen the clip that you're talking about. Okay, good. So where do you want to go with that, Daryl?
I just wanted to get your opinion. I mean, how can we help these Trump supporters? I guess it's my bottom line.
It's a real tragedy, You've got these people who Trump came out again yesterday and supported Putin. I mean, it is a disease inside the Republican Party, and he's not the only one doing it. And I'm wondering how this is going to work out for the GOP. I mean, how long can they continue to win elections with the crazy vote, with the people, with the, basically gullible white people who will fall for anything, whether it's lizard DNA or whether it's Putin is the hero of the story here. I don't know the answer to it, Daryl, but I know that the Republican Party has a big problem right now. And it goes, over at the banter, Ben Cohen's, the young Ben Cohen's website this morning, the whole op-ed was about how Romney McDaniel, the head of the RNC rather, had a choice about whether she was going to take on Matt Gaetz paying underage girls to have sex, or whether she was going to support these attacks on Judge Jackson, And no, we're not going to do anything, she said, basically, about, problems like this in our party. We're going to try and paint somebody else this way. It's just, it's pathetic. It really is. But where it's going to go, I don't know. But as long as the Republicans are having this internal battle, and supporting corrupt positions, I continue to believe that if Democrats pick up corruption as the single club they're going to use and put everything in that frame, that they will win. And I think this is a piece of it. I think this is absolutely a piece of it. The corruption of the Republican Party by money from Russian oligarchs. I mean, look at Mitch McConnell. He ran for re-election based on the fact that a Russian oligarch was going to build an aluminum factory in Kentucky. The guy never built it. After the election was over, the guy said, "Oh, I guess I don't need to do this anymore." But McConnell got him the benefits that he wanted and goodies like that. So I think that's what we need to point out. Daryl, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Catherine in Las Vegas. Hey, Catherine, what's up?
Well, I thank you for taking my call. I totally agree. However,
agree with what?
Elizabeth Warren, the corruption should be can be the centerpiece of a campaign. It was the centerpiece of Elizabeth Warren's campaign. In every interview, in every debate, when they asked, "What's your number one priority? What's the first thing you would do? What's your campaign about in one word?" she said, "Corruption." Now, she came out of the gates swinging, and at her, introduction rally in New York had 100,000 people. After one of the debates, flew to Colorado, had a rally with 60,000 people, was pulling huge numbers, bigger than most other candidates, rivaling Trump's numbers, if not beating his numbers. And as soon as she moved up in one poll to first place in the race, the media completely erased her. But for the fact that it was posted on social media, you wouldn't know that she was having this attendance. She was excluded from major articles. Even when the sweepstakes was going on, despite the fact that she was meeting weekly with Joe Biden to help him craft his economic package, and craft his half of his campaign platforms, when people like Jonathan Capehart interviewed the women in contention for VP, she was completely excluded from the article despite being reported as one of the front runners, and women who had already been reported to be out of the running for it were included. They made concerted efforts to erase her campaign. And so the anti-corruption message works if you can get it out there. But if you're someone that they believe will actually get rid of the corruption, they're going to make it really hard for you.
This is why in my article this morning over at Hartmann Report, and also in my rant, I'm saying this needs to be something that the entire party embraces. And it's going to be very uncomfortable for, some members of the party who are, who have their hand out, the Mansions and Cinemas of the world, and they're not the only ones. But the Congressional Progressive Caucus now is the largest or second largest caucus in the Democratic Party, and which was very much not the case 10 or 15 years ago. I understand what you're saying, Catherine, and I completely agree with it. And I was commenting at the time about how Elizabeth Warren had just basically been ghosted by the media.
I mean, major polls, they didn't even include her name in major polls, despite the fact that she was running first and second in most of the states early on.
I know. But see, if the entire party was talking about corruption, I don't think that would have happened.
But that's because she wasn't just talking about corruption like politicians do when they put it all over the TV. They knew that she was serious about it, and they couldn't have that.
There you go. And I think that, had she been I don't want to get into, because that sounds like I'm picking on Vice President Harris. But I still think that Elizabeth Warren is probably one of the strongest contenders for the White House in 2024. We'll see how it shakes out. I would certainly support her in a heartbeat. Catherine, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Helping you win the water cooler wars now that we're getting back to our water coolers. We'll be right back. And welcome back. And Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today? Dave? I think Dave's phone is muted. I'll put Dave on hold because I know that he has been on hold for a little bit. Barney in Argos, Indiana. Hey, Barney, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Well, I was just thinking about how you probably remember the election of '88 where Dukakis was like 20 points ahead. And then all of a sudden he kind of collapsed because of this Willie Horton ad that they put.
Well, it wasn't just the ad. It was the big gaffe was when the reporter using the ad, using that whole issue, when that, and I think it was Bernard Kell, but I could be wrong. I mean, that was back a long time ago.
Shaw. It was Bernard Shaw.
Bernard Shaw. Okay, I knew it was a Bernard. And the reporter asked him if your wife was had been murdered by this convict, would you want him put to death? And he waffled. And what he should have said was, I sure as hell would have felt that way. Whether it's the right thing to do under the law or not is another thing. But instead, he goes into this long, meandering, professorial thing. That was what killed Michael Dukakis, as much as the Willie Horton ad.
You're absolutely right about that. But then we got to go back to what Truman ran against the 80th Congress. He called it the do nothing.
Yep.
You remember?
I wasn't alive then, but I know the story. That was in 1948.
And then we have to really...
no, that was 1950. Or was it... No, it was 48.
But he was running for president.
Right.
And he said that he was 46. At some campaign stop out west, and they had like half the seats were empty, and this big fella got up in the back and he said, "Give him hell, Harry." And then Truman said, "Of course, I never gave nobody no hell." He says, "I just told the truth, and to them that was hell."
Exactly. It was one of his most famous lines ever. Yes.
Well, why can't they just tell the truth? All they have to do is show exactly what's been going on these past, I don't know how many years you could do it. But you take a guy like Putin, They ought to have him known as Rasputin, the mad Russian, and they ought to have Trump as the he's connected with him. Yeah. They said they were going to have Willie Horton and Dukakis like Siamese twins. They need to show what's going on, show the Republicans have done absolutely nothing, and get to the visceral. They have to get to the gut of these people. This intellectual stuff is wonderful, and it's all true, but it's the average voter is about a fifth grade bumper sticker, kind of thing, and
I get it.
It's unfortunate.
It was, the guy who wrote the book who called in, he was saying the same thing. Basically, you've got to simplify it tremendously. And that's why I'm calling for the Democrats to simplify it as much as is possible. Take it all to the issue of corruption. It works in American politics. It put Donald Trump in the White House. And
then he said...
Go ahead.
Yeah, he just says they're all corrupt. That's what Trump would immediately throw back at. And he's got Hunter Biden on the same level as his corruption. Yeah. This is ridiculous.
I know.
I'm sure you do know, and that's what makes it so frustrating for the 9-1 that you're going up against, at least.
Yeah, I'm with you, Barney. Okay. I'm with you. We need to simplify it, and we need to walk the talk. Barney, thanks a lot for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Helping you win. Well, I already said that. Helping you win the water cooler wars, didn't I? How about the place where despair is not an option? We'll be right back with your calls right after this. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So did you hear the story about the three white guys, 20, 22, 24 years old, who just pleaded guilty to trying to attack power grids in three different parts of the United States? According to the Justice Department, their scheme was that they were going to bring down electricity for three basically major cities or major regions of the United States. And the theory of this program is sort of like what Tim McVeigh was all about back in 1990, I think it was 3, when he blew up the federal building. Their scheme was that doing so, cutting off the power to these cities. Well, this is from the Department of Justice. Quote, the defendants believed their plan would cost the government millions of dollars and cause unrest for Americans in the region. They had conversations about how the possibility of the power being out for months would cause a race war and induce the next Great Depression. It's suicide pills and everything. Why aren't we talking about white terrorism in America? There's a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Lizard person free zone. No, just kidding. Okay. Sorry, that was a joke for people on TV. I put on my lizard mask. Picking up your phone calls. Oh, my. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I accidentally hit the mute button. I apologize for that.
Okay.
Hey, I wanted to say something about unions, but real quick, I wanted to say something about this reptilian thing, Tom. I got mixed into a conflict with a bunch of them. Archon means ruler, right? They were anti-mask. But anyways, they called me a psychic vampire, right? So I researched it, and it made me feel bad. But here's where it's relevant. Here's what I learned. I dumped my bad feelings about it because these people are authoritarian-minded, Tom. I mean, their version of utopia is just being told what to do, what to do.
Yeah, sadly.
And the reason why this is relevant is because, look, in the Donetsk People's Republic, there's this guy, Denis Bushilin, right? He was an acolyte of Sergei Mavrodi, who is he's an imprisoned Russian politician. Look, Tom, they literally turned a Ponzi scheme into a political movement.
Who's they?
They is Mavrodi and Denis Bushilin.
I have no idea who these people are, Dave. What?
He's a Russian.
So you're saying that the Russian government turned into a Ponzi scheme? Is that your point?
No, my point is all right. Look, it gets blurry. The differences in capitalist systems and authoritarian systems. There's no one authoritarian system's the same, Tom. There was another Russian dissident just today. He said that Vladimir Putin, I guess he's prophesied Vladimir Putin's death. He said if Vladimir Putin dies, it's going to be a lost war. If he loses a war, that probably will be his death.
Yeah.
And you know what? The guy's right. I saw.
Well, and there's rumors now that Putin is traveling around with a doctor who is a specialist in thyroid cancer, and he's gone on 30 different trips with him and all this kind of stuff. People are speculating about it. I don't know, Dave, how this is all going to shake out. Or if any of that's true. What I think is important is that this morning Zelensky said before the United Nations, Russia needs to be kicked off the UN Security Council. And our ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield, if I'm remembering her name correctly, said, let's at least for the moment remove Russia from the Security Council on a temporary basis, which is, I think, probably the only way they could do it immediately. And we'll wait, we'll see. They're literally debating that right now as we speak. George in Garden City, Kansas. Hey, George, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I just want to get your take on the 2024 election. Mm-hmm. I think Liz Cheney is setting up to make a run, and I think that's going to cause a split in the Republican Party. Yeah, I think she's going to use her name recognition.
Not a chance.
I think she's setting up to run.
No,
I
she's
think
not.
She will,
she is trying to hang on to her seat from Wyoming, and then eventually, when one of the senators retires, she wants to be the senator from Wyoming. Liz Cheney doesn't have a chance running for president.
I think in about 2 years, the political landscape.
What makes you think that, George? Is this just your opinion, or are you seeing something out there?
it's just my opinion, Tom. I just watch her in the on the January 6th commission when she's talking, and I think she's setting her up. I think she's one of the more conservative Republicans, real conservative Republicans, not these crazies out there now. And I just think that it's going to cause a split in the party. And it's going to be a big,
I think you're right on that.
Fight over.
You're seeing, in fact, with Judge Jackson's nomination, what we're seeing now is the Republican Party beginning to split into the Trump faction, or the Trump crazy faction, or the Trump say anything to get elected faction, versus the old-fashioned business coalition, the Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski kind of Republicans.
And I think Liz Cheney is going to kind of be their spokesman for their side of the Republican Party, and then who knows who's going to come out of that mess on the other side. Yeah. And I just think it's going to cause a big split, and I think, and I really don't have any idea on who's going to be the Democratic nomination.
We'll see how it shakes out, George. We'll see how it shakes out. I'm skeptical about Liz Cheney for president, but I would bet you that Mitt Romney is looking at it really seriously, and he has a chance.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now, again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. So, In my anti-corruption rant at the top of the first hour of this program, one of the things that I mentioned in that whole long list of issues that could be framed as, not even talking about them as progressive priorities or even American priorities or working people's priorities, but rather as anti-corruption priorities, was education. Ever since Ronald Reagan took a meat axe to education in the 1980s, we really, there are these moments in history, these kind of hinge points in history that are like before that and after that, right? Before 9/11, after 9/11, things were different. Well, the before Reagan, you could go to college if you could get into the school, if you could pass the tests or your grades were good enough. You could go to college pretty much anywhere in the country. Yes, there were some, Yale and Harvard were expensive, but, most colleges, certainly state colleges and easily community colleges, you could go to college and pay for it out of your pocket change, basically. Pay for it, with a part-time job. After Reagan, that all changed. When Reagan came into office, about 20% of the cost of higher education was paid for by tuition, and about 80% was paid for by state, federal, and local governments, and in some cases, colleges having a buffer of their own, basically some sort of an endowment or other kind of program. A lot of these were created in the 1860s, in 1863, I think it was, or 64, when Abraham Lincoln created the land-grant college program, where, as president, he identified 56 large parcels of land in different states all over the country, and gave those to the states and said, use this land to create enough money to build a university that people can go to college for free. Now, in doing that, what Lincoln was doing was standing on the shoulders of what Jefferson did, after he left the White House, when he created the University of Virginia as the first free college in the United States. So, obviously in both cases, there were some barriers to entry. But the point is that the idea that education is the foundational stuff, it's the foundational investment that we make in the intellectual infrastructure of our country, is solid. And those land-grant colleges that Lincoln created back in the 1860s are still out there. Michigan State University among them. I mean, there's a bunch of land-grant colleges. I believe there's still 56. There's a Google page devoted to them, in fact. So, education before Reagan was easy. I mean, getting into college, you had to work, when you went to high school, you had to get good grades, but getting in, paying for college wasn't an issue. After Reagan, it became a ticket to the poorhouse. We have literally millions of Americans, and not just young Americans. I mean, there are people in their 60s with college debt. There are literally millions of Americans who can't afford to buy a house, can't afford to start a family, can't afford to, or can't even take the chance of starting their own small business, which used to be the ticket to the American dream, right? Or one of the tickets to the American dream. Can't even do that because they have this massive student debt. Well, the law about student debt, it's called the Higher Education Act of 1965. This was passed when Lyndon Johnson was president. And Section 432A of that law says that the Secretary of Education, now in that case it would be Michael Cardona, and it says that the Secretary of Education, and I'm reading from the law, quote, has the authority to modify loan terms and, quote, enforce, pay, compromise, waive, or release any right, title, claim, lien, or demand, however acquired, including any equity of any right of redemption. And in other words, they can just wipe debt off the books, student debt, federally issued student debt. And in fact, we did this last year. Joe Biden bragged about it in, I believe it was in his State of the Union address. I might be wrong, but I remember him talking about it, how they wiped $17 billion of student debt off the books. Just wiped it off the books. Now, the problem is $17 billion is about 1% of the total student debt. We've got a 1.7 or $1.8 trillion student debt right now. But half of that student debt is federally financed and could be eliminated tomorrow morning. And there's a movement to do this. There's a group called the Debt Collective. And yesterday, there was a huge protest, a huge demonstration in Washington, D.C. People came from all over the country for a day of action on student debt. They have named their program Pick Up the Pen, Joe. In other words, pick up your pen and sign debt relief. You can do this by executive action. Or the Secretary of Labor, has the authority to do this, apparently, at least from my reading of this law. More than 1,000 professors nationwide have endorsed this demand. Biden, when he was running for president, President Biden, when he was running for president, made a campaign promise to eliminate $10,000 of student debt from all the federal loans. He has not fulfilled that yet. A lot of Democratic lawmakers in the Progressive Caucus, they're saying, how about $50,000 worth of student debt? Well, how about all of it? When my dad turned 17, World War II was in its last days, but nobody knew it was his last days. And he got out of high school, and, well, actually when he graduated from high school, he was 17. And he immediately joined the Army, as, young men did back then, going off to fight the Nazis and things. Now, by the time he got out of basic training, the war was over. And so they sent him over to Japan for 2 years, where he basically ran the swimming pool at the officers' club and was a lifeguard. It was my dad's tough duty. But, and he had a good time. But when he came back from the war, he got free college. He went to college for 2.5 years. He finally dropped out because mom got pregnant with me, and he needed an income, and so he got a job in a steel mill in Grand Rapids. But that student loan program that was called the GI Bill, that lasted until 1965. I'm not sure the education component of it lasted that long. It might have just been the housing component. But, it started in, as I recall, 1947, maybe 46, but I think it was 47. That program, for every $1, we now have the numbers. We can look back on this. There's no debate about this. For every $1 that the federal government spent educating people like my dad, or probably a better example, because my dad dropped out, a better example would be Louise's dad. He also joined the military during World War II. He joined the Navy. When he came back, he took the GI Bill and went to college and got his law degree. And he became the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan. He was earning so much more money than he would have earned if he didn't have a college degree. So now we look at the numbers and we see that for every $1 that was invested in students like my dad and Louise's dad back in the 40s, we got back $7. We, the country, we got $7 in added tax revenue through their lifetimes because they earned more and therefore they paid more in taxes. For every $1 we invested in the education of our young people, we got a $7 return, and that's just on the taxes. That doesn't count the fact that a lot of those people became scientists and invented things. I mean, the whole NASA thing, the dot-com revolution, all of this stuff, or much of this stuff, tracks back to the GI Bill, and this, where America went from the majority of Americans having a high school diploma to a really significant minority of Americans, or a much larger minority of Americans, having a college diploma. It became the new standard. And we need to go back to that. And we can't go back to that if going to college means that for the next 30 years of your life, you're not going to be able to start a family, buy a house, start a business, do anything other than just, labor in the trenches. And again, this is all caused by the corruption of the big bankers who are making a fortune on the private side of the student loans, which is another thing we have to do something about.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What politician could stand up against this? What say you? We'll be back at 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, so something that's been bothering me lately is that I've been seeing progressive members of Congress just randomly tweeting things out like, pass Medicare for all, forgive student debt. It's like, not only are you preaching to the choir, you sound a little pandery. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they sound a little pandery. Like, and it's almost like a cop saying, like a police officer saying, let's arrest that serial killer that's killing people in our neighborhood. Like,
or
no,
don't commit
you go
crimes.
do it. It's your job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's their job. They're in Congress. Why are they like? So my question to you is, do they not have access to Biden at all? That they have to resort to tweeting, like in the hopes that he would be scrolling through thousands of tweets to find theirs?
That's a good question, Lewis. And my answer is grounded in something Bernie taught me when, back 18 years ago when he was on this show. And that is that politicians, while they portray themselves as leaders, are actually almost always followers. They may have leadership skills, and really good politicians, Franklin Roosevelt, John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, have good leadership skills. They can use that, but they have to follow the people. And so when enough people form a movement, my recollection is that it was Bernie who used this metaphor. I might be wrong, but when a big enough parade gathers on the street out in front of the politician's office for a particular issue, when it hits a threshold where the politician realizes that movement is big enough that it's going to go places, that's the moment that the politician runs out and jumps in front of the parade and hoists his own flag and says, "This is my parade. I'm now the leader of this parade." They never start, or only very rarely start, as the leaders of the parade. Teddy Roosevelt became the trust buster, not because he thought it was a brilliant idea, but because the American people were so sick and tired of oligarchy, basically, of giant corporations. Lyndon Johnson did the Civil Rights Act, not because he was a lifelong advocate of civil rights. I mean, he was in all probability, a white racist from Texas. He did it, at least earlier in his life. He did it because the parade got big enough he couldn't ignore it any longer. So my guess is, Lewis, what you're seeing when you're seeing Democratic politicians talking about these individual issues, I mean, obviously, sometimes they're bragging about their own accomplishments. I just introduced this into Congress, and I hope it passes. They're trying to build some momentum. They're trying to get the word out. But I think more often than not, what they're trying to do is they're trying to build the parade. They're trying to get enough people to say, yes, this is what we want, that it hits that critical mass where President Biden and others in the administration, this is what I'm doing right now about student debt, try to put the pressure on to where they reach the point where they go, that's a damn big parade. I guess I better get in front of that thing. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just very unproductive because
I don't think so.
Basically, just preaching to the choir.
They are preaching to the choir, but if you can create, and I think Donald Trump and QAnon and all these guys are great examples of this. If you can create the appearance of a movement will emerge. And creating the appearance of the movement starts out by speaking out on social media and whatever other venues you have, showing up at school board meetings and stuff like that. Lewis, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. The American Lung Association just came out with an amazing new study where they took Joe Biden's goal of a zero-emission power grid by 2035 and zero-emission passenger vehicles across the United States by 2035, which is a ways down the road, and trucks and buses being zero-emission by 2040, and said, okay, what will happen if we do this? They discovered that over 100,000 lives would be saved, people who wouldn't be getting cancer and COPD and asthma and all these kind of things. Over $1.2 trillion in public health costs would be avoided, and just massive, and 2.8 million fewer asthma attacks, among other public health problems. They note how extraordinary this would be, what a huge and positive impact it would have on America's public health, and how it's completely doable. The American Lung Association. The one note they say is that, quote, opposition from Republicans and 2 key Democratic senators makes it easier said than done. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Hang on just a second here. Oh, yeah. Bernie Sanders. The other thing that I wanted to share with you today is Bernie Sanders calling out the union movement and pointing out that this is a great way to deal with oligarchy and corporate greed. I mean, and frankly, I don't think that there is any other better way to call out oligarchy and corporate greed than to do that. So number one, I wanted to point that out. The other thing, and I, as I mentioned in the first hour, the other thing though is Ron DeSantis. This is totally weird. Ron DeSantis, is basically exploiting the fact that parents worry about their kids. They worry about their kids in all different kinds of circumstances. The first was, oh my God, your kid is going to be made to feel guilty because he's white, and et cetera. The whole CRT thing. And now it's Disney wants to turn your kid gay. I mean, that's basically the pitch. This whole "Don't Say Gay" bill. But what's really weird is that while DeSantis and the Republicans in Florida are out there portraying themselves as paragons of morality, and we're going to protect children from predators, Matt Gaetz, who is accused of being a predator against a child, paying an underage girl to have sex with her. Matt Gaetz, there's a person who has some knowledge about this. This is whether this person is DeSantis' appointee to chair the Florida Business Licensing Agency. This person's name is Halsey Beshears. And Halsey would apparently know whether these Venmo payments to this underage girl, would know the details around them. Now, Gaetz has denied that he made payments to her for sex. He said he was trying to help her out, giving her a little money for school. Right. But DeSantis is doing a cover-up down there in Florida right now. He says, because the news media wants to see the records. They're using these open records requests to get the information. And Florida, by the way, speaking of kids in Florida, it's even worse than that. Down in Florida, there is a real problem. This state has a real problem right now with their foster care system because DeSantis privatized it. So now it's for-profit companies offering child care, and there's just all these scandals about child endangerment and abuse popping up in the foster care system down there. Child protective services should be the last thing you privatize. But, hey, DeSantis and Republicans, hey, let's make some money on this. So anyhow, the Open Records Act down in Florida says that, if a news organization or anybody sues to have public record information, that it has to be provided as soon as the person responsible for conveying that, it's called the custodian of the records, as soon as the custodian can accomplish that job. And the custodian of the records typically takes 1 day to deliver documents. Well, the news media want to look at the documents that have to do with Halsey Beshears' knowledge of or oversight of or whatever Matt Gaetz's Venmo payments to this underage girl that he says he was helping her with school, and others are suggesting that he was paying her for sex. And Ron DeSantis has put a hold on these documents. He's saying, no, you can't see these documents about Matt Gaetz paying underage girls for sex. You can't see them. Sorry. And they're saying, why? And he's like, well, I need to review them. And the review might take, well, I don't know, a few weeks. It might take a few months. It might take until November after the election. Who knows? I mean, he's not literally saying those words, but that's certainly the implication. Matt Gaetz is up for re-election in November, as is every other member of the House of Representatives. And it's looking more and more like Ron DeSantis doesn't want to have a sex scandal going on when he's trying to become president, which will, come along in another 2 years. So just wanted to flag that for you. Keep an eye on this story. This Matt Gaetz story has the potential to really blow up in the face of the GOP that is trying to make themselves the QAnon party. We're concerned about those children being tracked out of that pizza parlor. This is their thing now.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And they're trying to drag anybody affiliated with the Democratic Party, including, a nominee for the Supreme Court, into this mud. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious. Whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the civil rights movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a Black Power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. Well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. And Cheryl in Lawrenceville, Georgia. We had an earlier caller who thought that the next Republican nominee was going to be Liz Cheney. You're calling about that, Cheryl?
Yes, I am. I totally agree. I've been saying that all along. Not only is she going to run, Kinzinger is going to be her sidekick, and the Democrats and the liberal media are giving her all of her sound bites. They're calling her a hero. They put her on this committee. Big mistake. She voted with Trump, I believe, between 92 and 97% of the time.
Yep.
And she saw an opportunity. She just like the rest of them, a self-serving politician. Now, she's going to run. She's going to pull a lot of Democrats because she's on this committee and everybody's calling her a hero. She's going to pull Republicans. Like I said, she's going to pull a lot of Democrats. It's dangerous. I see it coming just like the former caller. And Kinzinger as well. He's going to get in there wherever he can fit in. But they're calling her a hero. And I've only heard two people in the media, call her on it. And that was Ellie Mistal and I think Tiffany Cross. I'm like, it was a mistake. I mean, I can't even remember the head of the January 6th Commission's name because she's hijacked it.
Adam Schiff, yeah.
No, not Adam Schiff.
No, it's Benny Thompson. That's right.
Benny Thompson, right.
Yeah.
All they're talking about is, her testicles are bigger than all the Republicans, and everybody just hyping her, and they're giving her campaign ads.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see if she wins this primary in Wyoming that's coming up in a month or three, and how far she can ride this thing. I think the Cheney brand is irretrievably broken. I think the war in Iraq, just did that. But I may be wrong. Cheryl, we'll see. Thanks for weighing in. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, with all of the voter suppression and people being thrown off the rolls and not knowing it, I'm just wondering how soon is too soon to start reminding people, double check whether you're still registered to vote. Find out how to re-register because your vote counts.
Yeah. If my recollection is right, when Jeb Bush threw 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in Florida just in time for his brother to run for president in that state, he did it about 4 or 5 months before the election. So people probably wouldn't have known, what or when or where or how they were doing it. But I may be wrong on that. But it's always
month in advance too late.
It's never too early to start looking, Sandra. Particularly because in some states you have to register, months in advance in order to vote in an election.
Particularly with primaries,
So this is a great time, and thank you for pointing that out. That's a great one, and thank you. And by the way, the Morrill Act, which created the land grant colleges, I was ranting about a little earlier. The Morrill Act was passed in 1862. It was Congressman Morrill, that Abraham Lincoln signed into law. So, Chris in Portland. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hey there, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. One comment and a question. Comment is, Florida privatizing CPS is terrifying. And my question is it true, or do you think it's true that the reason why we won't, the government won't get rid of student debt is because, of the Army?
No.
Because without that, people wouldn't be joining.
Right. The GI Bill does get a lot of people into the military, but if they want to get more people in the military, all they have to do is raise the pay a little bit, or reduce the requirements, I suppose. But no, I don't think that's it, Chris. I think what's happened is that this slow evolution happened. When Reagan, like I said before, when Reagan came into office, tuition covered 20% of the cost of going to college. And now tuition covers as much as 80% of the cost of going to college. And the difference was made up by state, local, and federal government. And Reagan started dialing back the federal piece of that in the 1980s. States started dialing back the state part of that throughout the 90s. And we just saw this gradual process of college getting more and more and more expensive as both Democratic and Republican administrations in state after state and at the federal level as well saw, being fiscally responsible. They were all drinking the Reagan Kool-Aid to a certain extent, the neoliberal Kool-Aid. And so, college just got more and more and more expensive until, here we are with, all these people walking around with $100,000 student debt or $50,000 student debt. And it's crazy. So that's my take on that, Chris. I don't think that, I don't think that it's the Army. Although it's an interesting thought. Carrie in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
I got a call from my brother, and he was telling me about China and India having a war at the Himalayan border. And I was just calling you to ask you, have you heard anything about that?
No. To answer in one word, I don't. I know that there has been, conflict around that neighborhood, and India. I back in '99, I think it was. I spent a week in way up in northern India in the Himalayas. It was around 4,000 or 5,000 feet at a town called McLeod-Ganj, and which is where the Dalai Lama lives. And there was 20 some odd of us that spent a week with the Dalai Lama there. And, all these people had fled from Tibet into India for that, because Tibet had been taken over by the Chinese. And this one kid young monk that I talked to, he told us the story about how when he decided to leave Tibet, it was because his brother was wearing a T-shirt that had a picture of John Lennon on it, with the big round glasses. And the Chinese army that was occupying Tibet at the time, I think it was Lhasa, was the capital city, thought that with the round glasses, thought that was the Dalai Lama, and they took him into the center of town and shot him dead. And that was when this kid's family said, "Okay, time to get out of town." But that's about all I know about it, and that was 2 decades ago. So I have not been tracking it. I'm sorry, Kerry.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Do you know something that I don't, or that I need to know?
No, all I heard is it's been going on for 4 years.
Yeah,
I just read up on it.
There's low-level border disputes going on all over the place. You've got India and Pakistan with Kashmir. You've got the area around Tibet between India and China. There's just like so many of these border disputes going on around the world. But I specifically don't know a great deal about that. Maybe somebody who does will call in and can fill us in. Kerry, thanks for the call. Nick in Crofton, Maryland. Hey, Nick, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I think that Biden needs to add more people to the Supreme Court. And to your subject that you were talking about a little earlier, student loan debt, I think he needs to do bold things like that. And
I agree.
I think, I heard this morning on one of the morning shows getting dressed for work that his poll numbers, even, with all of the good news that most of your listenership and you and I both know that he's been actually doing very well as far as his job numbers and different things that he's done. I'm not 100% in Biden's camp, but I think overall he's done a pretty good job. His numbers don't look good, and that doesn't portend too well for the midterms. Yeah. So that's why I think he ought to do. Let me get your opinion on this. What do you think that the White House thinks about the electorate? Because do they think that if you do a move, which I think would be bold, like eliminating a large portion or all of student loan debt would be like such a shock? I don't know what people think about that would be wrong with that. To me...
Well, I can tell you how Republicans will message against it because they've already been doing it, which is to say, it's not fair. I paid off my student loan debt last year, and now the guy sitting next to me in the office just got $40,000 knocked off his student debt. Where's my $40,000? That's how they're going to play it.
Well, therein lies the problem of which oft talked about messaging of the Democratic Party to come back at that and say, this would be an instant jolt. You have generations of people who are still living in their mother and father's house, can't buy a new car, all of that. And we need to get, absolute little oomph in it too and go right back at them with a lot of things. Just like I believe the Supreme Court. And I know you have other calls, but let me give you this argument. I think Biden needs to stand up there and say, in a major way, to say, look, I've seen enough over this year and a half to these people can't be negotiated with. One, they believe that Donald Trump won the election, and they're insurrectionists. Two, they think that January 6th was fine with me, a tourist occasion or whatever. Three, they think that masks and vaccines during this hell that this country has been going through, not needed. I can't negotiate with these people, so I'm going to do things by
executive order.
executive order that I need to do. And I actually think that people would stop eating and drinking and look at the TV and say, you know what, that sounds right.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Nick, and there's a lot he can do by executive order that he hasn't so far. There's also a lot he can't do. There's an awful lot of stuff that requires Congress to act. And there, of course, he's got the problem in the Senate of Manchin Cinema. But I'm with you. Nick, thank you very much for the call. I think it would be a politically strategic masterstroke.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And who knows? It's a half a year until the election. Maybe Joe Biden thinks it'll be a masterstroke too, but it'll be more effective in August or September. We'll see. And welcome back. Nicholas in Baltimore, Maryland. Do you want to try the both sides are bad thing?
Yeah, I was just a little bit, you see Nancy Pelosi trading stocks, and they're all still getting money from large corporations, just like the Republicans are. How can
not all of them? The Progressive Caucus has about 100 members, and they, by and large, they don't take corporate PAC money.
They don't.
And there's no analog to that in the Republican Party. There literally is not one single Republican in Congress who says, I don't take corporate money. You've got about 100 Democrats who are saying, we're not taking corporate money. That's about half the party, half the elected chunk of the party, or a little less than half of that. And that's significant. That's consequential. And that's why, I don't buy this stuff. I mean, I realize it was the main message that the Russian trolls were pushing on Facebook in 2016. It was identified by Robert Mueller. The number one message. There were two messages they were promoting. In the black community, they were promoting the idea that Hillary Clinton was talking about black people with her super predator comment, which hurt her badly. And across the board, in a more general community, the main message of the Russian trolls was both parties are the same. They're all corrupt. Therefore, don't bother to vote. If you're going to take that position, Nicholas, I'm going to call you out on it. It's not true.
I would disagree with that. You can say that Russian
disagree with it all day long, but it's not true. What you're saying is not true. Yes, there are corrupt Democrats. I'll be the first to acknowledge that. I've got one here in Oregon, and I'm working to get his primary opponent elected to replace him. But not all Democrats are corrupt. And if you want to see this country stop being run by corrupt politicians, then you need to get inside the Democratic Party and start promoting uncorruptible politicians. So, it's just there's no alternative, frankly. But voting for the Green Party is not going to do it. Or complaining on a talk show is not going to do it. James in Ozark, Missouri. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, with respect to the caller before about Liz Cheney running for president.
Yeah.
I don't know. I tuned in late to the program, but I think there is no way that she runs. If she does, I don't even think she gets on the stage with the people that the Republicans want to put up there. Kristi Noem, Chris Christie, Dan Crenshaw, Ted Cruz, Trump, or one of his kids. There's no way that she gets the following that any of those people.
I agree with you. I think it's, I just don't think it's possible, frankly. I think she will be running for the Senate. Was it Mike Enzi is one of the Wyoming senators? I don't recall who the other one is. But if one of the Wyoming senators goes down in flames, I think that she has a good chance of running for the Senate in Wyoming. But even there, it's going to be a heavy lift. She is facing a serious primary opponent right now. And Kinzinger just said, hey, I can't deal with this. He's out.
Yeah, so it's like if we're watching, MSNBC, because that's a talking point that my father likes to mention a lot. Oh, I think Kinzinger and Cheney will really stand in there. We're not going to go in there and change in the primaries from Democrat to Republican and vote for one of those people. It's just not happening.
Yeah, I agree with you, James. I agree with you. But let's. Neither one of us are omniscient. We don't know everything. We'll see what happens, but I'm very skeptical about Liz Cheney going any farther than, frankly, being in the House and maybe the Senate. We'll be right back. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. 27 Republican senators sent a letter to the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, echoing talking points that the American Petroleum Institute pushed out on Twitter recently, saying that basically if we're going to stop importing Russian oil into the United States, which, by the way, the Russian oil imports into the U.S. are just a trickle. It's just a tiny drop in the bucket. If we're going to stop doing that, we need to, and these are some quotes from the API Twitter, we need to unleash America's energy. We need to release permits for energy development on federal lands. We need to issue offshore leasing plans for the next 5 years. We need to accelerate energy permitting infrastructure. We need to reduce regulatory and legal uncertainty. Right. It's a scam. And these 27 Republican senators are owned by the big fossil fuel companies because the Supreme Court allowed it with their Citizens United decision. We have to do something about this. There's a whole video rant about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 52 minutes past the hour. Dwight in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Hey, Dwight, what's up?
Yes, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I got a question here. With all these voter suppression laws that the Republicans are passing, I don't understand why the Justice Department hasn't done anything, which leads me into my next question. How, with all the evidence that the committee is finding with the January 6th tobacco there, if the Attorney General hasn't acted on the voter rights suppression, it makes me wonder if he's going to do anything to bring these thugs into justice.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two separate issues, Dwight, although your larger point of the Justice Department, maybe wimping out, I think is a concern for many of us, and we need to keep an eye on it. But let's set January 6th aside for a moment. The reason that the Justice Department, actually there have been a whole bunch of lawsuits about these voting laws. Most of them have been run by Mark Elias through this private organization that he's part of, and many of them successfully, actually, or some of them successfully, and the Justice Department has joined in some of those actions. But by and large, what these states are doing is not against the law, and that's the problem. It was against the law until John Roberts and 4 other right-wing crackpots, Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court, struck down the law that Congress passed back in 1965, the Voting Rights Act, or gutted it, in the Shelby County decision. Just took out an entire section, basically, and John Roberts proclaimed, hey, and this is when Obama was president, hey, there's a black guy in the White House. There's no more racism in America. We don't need these laws anymore, and just decided to do away with them, using a power that, by the way, the Constitution does not give the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took that power onto themselves in 1803 in a case called Marbury versus Madison. So the problem, Dwight, that we're facing is that these states are doing this and getting away with it to the extent that they are because it's not illegal. Congress tried to fix that. You had the John Lewis Voting Rights Enhancement Act that would have made a lot of these laws illegal. And then you had the Freedom to Vote Act that Joe Manchin, of all people, actually helped write, that would have made a lot of the other stuff that the Republicans are up to illegal. And both of those pieces of legislation died in the United States Senate in the face of 100% Republican opposition and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema refusing to break the filibuster. So the problem that we have is not the Justice Department, Dwight. It's the fact that it is not illegal. There is no actual right to vote in the Constitution, or at least the Supreme Court has never ruled that there is. You can't discriminate against a person based on their gender or on their race, but you'd have to prove that it was a racial gerrymander or it was a racial attempt. And that's where Mark Elias has had some successes. But it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Dwight, thank you for the call. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I love your idea. of running against corruption. I think we have a little bit of a problem We all know as soon as we roll out the word corruption, Republicans are going to be all over it. Republicans generally wreak havoc, and then they blame it on the Democrats. So in advance of naming it, we should rule out the Department of Recovery of Losses and start itemizing losses due to externalities caused by fossil fuel extraction, etc. Losses of fraud perpetrated on Medicare, loss of public education to private education, and we should inflation caused by monopolies. I can go on. We should itemize them, and we should put price tags next to them, not names. And you know how Joe Biden said in front of everyone, "Don't take credit, Republicans, for things that you didn't vote for, because I've got a list, and you know I've got a list." And he holds the list up. So he has names. So we all know who is in charge of breaking these infractions. So he can say that, hey, we have a list, but right now we're not assigning names to the list. We're just putting numbers and working to get the money back.
I love it, Lori. You're brilliant. That is an absolutely brilliant idea. I totally support it. Lori, thank you so much for that. That was great. We'll be right back. Alex Lawson's going to be here about the threat to Medicare.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmanReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Helps Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their health care program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer health care systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like health care card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program, The Threat to Medicare Revealed. We have had pieces of this conversation over the years. Let's check in with Alex Lawson, our old buddy and occasional fill-in host for me on this show. He's the executive director of Social Security Works. The website socialsecurityworks.org and strengthensocialsecurity.org. And on Twitter, it's SSWorks or ALaw202, as in Alex Lawson. Alex, welcome back to the program. Give us an update on where first of all, I'm curious, whatever happened with Trump's efforts to basically destroy Medicare by putting an anti-Medicare guy in charge of it, essentially. And where is Medicare at right now? And then going forward, what are the challenges to Medicare?
Tom, thanks for having me. It's a complicated answer because what happened is from Trump to now, the industry forces haven't let up at all, and unfortunately continue to just chip away at traditional Medicare. There have been some places where we might have shut down some threats, but new threats are opened up by industry. They just won't stop coming to destroy our Medicare. And it's super insidious, as you are one of the few who points out. They're not going after it to just destroy Medicare. What they are doing is they're taking it over from the inside by privatizing Medicare, either through the back door with these direct contracting entities that are renamed REACH entities, and also just through the Medicare Advantage program. And the Biden administration just announced today an 8.5% increase for next year to these Medicare Advantage plans, where these private insurers are right now record profits. So this is just taxpayer money going directly into the profits of these huge private insurance companies. And as you know, Tom, they only make their money in one way, denying care. And every time we look into it, if there's an IG report looking into it, what do they find? Wrongful denials of care. Every time they look into it, MedPAC, which is the institution that looks over the accounting of them, what do they find just recently? We're overpaying Medicare. It is Medicare Advantage. It is bankrupting traditional Medicare. So this program continues unabated. And unfortunately, Tom, I'd say it's accelerating its destruction of traditional Medicare from the inside.
So tell me about this reinvention of direct contracting entities, the so-called DCEs. I was going off on these things 6 months or a year ago when I first learned about it, but now they've figured out that people know about them, and so they're changing the name, or is this a whole brand new program? What's the deal?
No, they got scared. I mean, Tom, it's a classic one, unfortunately. What I say, this was a program that was set up by Kushner and his criminal cabal under the Trump administration. But when it was handed off to the Biden administration, we were out front calling for an end to it. And I first got the warning signs that this was going to be an accepted form of corruption that we would be fighting for the long term, like Medicare Advantage. They just paused one part of the program, and they tried to get us to accept that. And we are, we being the grassroots movement against Medicare privatization, we didn't accept that. And we said, no, you have to end this direct contracting approach, which is nothing more than backdoor Medicare privatization. It's just moving people into a private system without them even saying that's okay. And what the administration came back with, and they wanted us to be okay with it. They said, we're going to transform it into this new program, and it's got a new name. It's called REACH now. Unfortunately for them, we know policy, and we looked at it and we're saying this is the same thing. You can't allow private equity insurance middleman into the system and expect anything other than what they have been doing for over a decade now in Medicare Advantage. When you put someone in between the provider and the patient, what they do is wrongfully deny care. So it doesn't matter what name it's under, it's all one attack. And it's continuing under the Biden administration. Now, do I think it rises to the level of the White House? I doubt it right now. I think it's sitting lower in the bureaucracy. It's under an agency called CMMI, which is under CMS, which is under HHS. And sort of the big thing in a bureaucracy is there's all these levels where decisions can be made. And industry is really astute at targeting these sort of middle bottom levels and taking over that part of it. And it often doesn't make its way all the way up to the White House. But unfortunately for the administration, this is not a fight that people are going to just be okay with. You know, they're not going to lay off on this. This is Medicare privatization, Tom. This is the same thing that you and I have been talking about for literally years here.
Yeah,
so
for decades.
It's just another wrinkle in this fight of industry and Wall Street seeing a public program and looking at it as a potential place to just extract money by hurting people.
We're talking with Alex Lawson, the executive director of SocialSecurityWorks.org. Alex, how, just for people who might have just tuned in the last 6 months or so, it's been a while since I've done a good in-depth rant about Medicare and Medicare Advantage. And Medicare Advantage is on TV, every single day, begging people, hey, there's new Medicare Part C Advantage or Medicare Part C. They're not even calling it Medicare Advantage anymore.
I know.
People are realizing the Medicare Advantage is a scam, so now they're calling it Medicare Part C. This in a big way got transformed and emerged during George W. Bush's administration, and I think it was 2003 when he tried to privatize Social Security. That didn't work out all that well. He said he was going to use his political capital from the Iraq War to privatize Social Security. But he did succeed in creating this privatization program for Medicare Advantage. And now it's about half of all people who think they're on Medicare are actually on a private for-profit plan. They're not all for-profit, but the vast majority of them are on one of these private for-profit plans. What's the downside of that? What happens to people when they get on Medicare Advantage that they probably aren't being told about when they call that toll-free number on TV?
There's so many places to go at that. The fact that they're on TV all the time recruiting people and only selling, what they see as the positives of it, and they're not actually laying out the true costs. And most people, the vast majority of people, they don't know the difference between Medicare, Medicare Advantage, Part C. It's quite complicated, as you know. And so people think it's Medicare. But the truth is, it's actually just a private insurance company. United Health, made $24 billion last year and most in profits. And most of that money is coming now from contracting with the government. It's from Medicare Advantage and some Medicaid services. So this is the cash cow for the industry. And what does it mean? It means that when you're healthy, everything looks great. This is just like in the private insurance market before Medicare age, right? Most people feel okay about their health insurance right up until they need it, Tom. And that's the whole game. They know that 90% of people at any one time don't actually need their health insurance. It's only 10% of the people who are engaged in it. And when people need their health care, that's when they find out that the profit model of corporate insurance is to deny care. So when you need it, that's when you don't get it. And that's the exact opposite of traditional Medicare. Traditional Medicare is when you need a service, you get that service.
Right.
So the difficulty is the oldest, the sickest, those who are most vulnerable in Medicare Advantage will find themselves denied the care that they need.
Right. So, I'm on regular Medicare. I've went through surgery. I've, go to the doctor, all these kinds of things. And I don't have to pre-approve anything. Nothing has to be run by my insurance company. You just show up and you get the services. You check into the hospital. It's all paid for. It's like magic. But I understand if I had signed up for a Medicare Advantage plan, pretty much everything I do would have to be run by the insurance company first. Is that right?
Correct. The same way that most people have, experienced healthcare for their lives before Medicare, which is also part of the trick that these insurers are playing. When they looked into it, when the Inspector General looked into these wrongful denials, Tom, they found that over 90% of people who were wrongfully denied care did not submit, did not know they could submit, and therefore did not submit a complaint saying, hey, I was wrongfully denied care, which they would have been reversed. But they didn't know that that was a thing. So they were just denied care that they needed and thought, that's
so they just paid the $6,000 bill or whatever it is.
Exactly. Or went without care. This is also a big problem. So it's a really insidious system, Tom, but it is also complicated on purpose because at its root, it's really simple. They can only make money by denying care. Right. So if you are covered, quote unquote, by them, expect to be denied exactly at the moment when you need it.
It's incredible. Alex, we just have 45 seconds to a hard break. Tell me, what can people do about this? Is it lobbying? It's Javier Becerra is the HHS secretary, isn't he? If my memory serves me right.
Yes, and we have a lot of organizing going on right now. We have Senator Warren and we have Pramila Jayapal in the House. We have a lot of champions who are focused on this. And Secretary Becerra has said that they need to stop these overpayments to Medicare Advantage. So we have a lot to work with. Even President Biden put a line in his budget about it. So we have a lot to work with, but we need to increase the volume coming from people. And so I think if you go to socialsecurityworks.org, and you connect with us or whatever sort of organizing you do, make this something that you focus on. Make protecting traditional Medicare a focus of your organizing because, as you said, it's close to the tipping point of more than half of the system being private.
Which is going to be hell on wheels if we ever try to do Medicare for all,
exactly.
which I think is plan, is part 2 of their plan. Alex Lawson, the executive director, socialsecurityworks.org. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a moment. I got a geeky science for you, and we'll pick up your phone calls. And welcome back. What a day, huh? A lot of interesting stuff going on here. Let's see here. Gary in Kansas City, Kansas. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, in keeping with your theme of Republican corruption, I wanted to list the 4 corrupt GOP economic messages today.
Okay.
I wanted to start out with number 1. Republicans say billionaire corporations are blameless job creators, so we have to give them everything they want and make them people. But in fact, as we've talked before on the program, the Kauffman Foundation study has shown that Fortune 500 corporations basically created no new net jobs over a 30-year period, I think ending around 2009 or 2010. So that's the first myth. The second myth that Republicans say is that slashing billionaire taxes helps the economy. But we found that slashing billionaire taxes from 1918 through 1929, slashing them from 77 to 24% created the Great Depression. We found that slashing billionaire taxes from 1945 through 1987, from 94% to 38%, caused the 1987 stock market crash. And we found that slashing billionaire taxes in 1983 through 2008, and also slashing capital gains taxes by in excess of a fourth, caused the 2008 Great Recession. So that's number 2. Number 3, Republicans say that government aid to the poor hurts the economy. But we all know that when a poor person gets $1 of income, they have to spend almost every penny of that dollar just to survive, which then stimulates the economy. Every extra dollar we give to a billionaire is they only spend a portion of that dollar.
Yeah, most of it just goes in the money bin.
That's right. and so they don't stimulate the economy. And the fourth big myth of Republican economics is Republicans say we can't increase the minimum wage because of inflation. But in fact, most of the current inflation is caused by corporations raising their prices to get rapacious profits, and that's causing inflation. Right. And I think that as Democrats, if we go along with your theme of corruption, and then after we've made it simple, if we then on occasion can amplify the corruption by explaining some of the specifics, I think we can win some people to our side and perhaps have some real success in 2022.
I think so. I like your points, Gary, and I can't disagree with any of them. I would add to it that, Republicans had this thing back in the 80s where they were elevating, they created job creators. I don't know if it's a Frank Luntzism or not, but it probably is. That, if you just give more money to rich people, they will hire somebody. And there was that slogan, I've never seen anybody hired by a poor person, which is, by the way, complete nonsense. I've hired lots of people when I was taking no salary whatsoever when I was building my own businesses. And that's true of most small businesses. Most of them are not started by rich people. And
that's exactly right.
But they're not even bothering with those lies anymore, Gary. I mean, it's been a long time since I've heard anybody talking about job creators. Everybody's figured out that that's a scam. They've moved on now to saying that they're the ones protecting our children from critical race theory and pedophiles. I mean, that's now their shtick. So it's going to be tough selling economics, but I'm with you, Gary. You did a great summary of your 4 points. I love it. You should turn it into an op-ed and push it out there and tweet it at me, and I'll retweet it. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So how do you know which party has the most crooks in it? The Republicans are always saying, oh, those Democrats are soft on crime and, a lot of murders in Democrat-run cities. Well, for the record, first off, red states and red counties have a higher per capita murder rates than do blue states and blue counties. This is just a fact. But secondly, let's look at some of the administrations. I mean, the Obama administration had no criminal indictments. The Jimmy Carter administration had 1. The Bill Clinton administration had 2. But what about the Republican administrations? It was 16 for George W. Bush. It was 26 criminal indictments for Ronald Reagan. Richard Nixon's administration had 76 criminal indictments. And of course, the full-time professional rapist and grifter, Donald Trump, he had 215 criminal indictments. So who's really soft on crime? We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. Welcome back. A quick geeky science. This is absolutely fascinating science. They did this. This is not one of the examples of where they've done large-scale epidemiological studies. Instead, they took individual cells from humans, from lung tissue and bronchial, tracheal, nasal, basically your breathing system. They took those cells and they grew them in petri dishes and cell cultures from all these different cells from the human respiratory tract. And then they infected some of those, or infected is the wrong word, they exposed some of those cells to a compound called interleukin-13, IL-13. Interleukin-13 is one of the substances, I believe they're called cytokines, but I may be wrong on that, but it's one of the substances that your body produces as part of its immune response. Right? And when it's in too large a response, when there's too much interleukin-13 in your body, you get autoimmune conditions. So in other words, your body's attacking itself, essentially. Asthma is one of those. There's too much interleukin-13. So what they did was they gave some of these cells, half the cells, they gave them asthma by exposing them to interleukin-13. And then they exposed all the cells to the COVID virus to see what happens. And what they discovered was that the asthmatic cells had produced, as a response to that interleukin 13, in other words, because they were asthmatic cells, they had produced a little layer of mucus around themselves that made it harder for the virus to get to the membrane of the cell where it could inject its viral material into the cell and turn the cell into a virus-making machine. In other words, it was harder for the asthmatic cells to get infected with COVID than it was the normal lung cells. You know, having asthma is no fun at all, and it can be very problematic in a whole lot of ways. But I think it's, you know, this is, now looking at the epidemiology of this, the thing that led them to this research was they discovered that people with asthma, you know, they assumed that, you know, they knew that diabetes was a risk. They knew that obesity was a risk. They knew that there were, you know, that organ transplants and things, these were all risk factors. They assumed asthma put you at greater risk of dying from COVID. Turns out people with asthma were doing just fine with COVID. Well, not just fine, but I mean, they weren't dropping dead at a different rate than people without asthma. In fact, it seemed like the asthma was providing a small amount of protection, and that's what led them to this research. Now, this is not to say you should run out and try and get asthma, but if you have asthma, you can turn down the panic dial a little. We'll be back with your calls right after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Because even if you do get sick with COVID, if you have asthma, you probably will have a milder case, at least according to this research.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. An amazing story out of New Hampshire, the state legislature. This was after, in Virginia, the new governor, Glenn Youngkin, who ran as I'm not Donald Trump, and then immediately put up a tip line for parents to turn in for parents to report their kids' teachers if they say something subversive. Now in New Hampshire, they've got a law that prohibits the dissemination of certain divisive concepts related to sex and race. Those divisive concepts being that people could be unconsciously racist. A conservative moms group has put up a $500 bounty in New Hampshire for the first person who could destroy the reputation and career of a teacher using this new law. So the teachers union sued the state of New Hampshire, and now the Republicans in New Hampshire, who control the state, are fighting back by putting up a new law that is going to require teachers to take a loyalty oath and ban any, quote, any negative account or representation of the founding and history of the U.S. It's nuts. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. By the way, my rant on student debt this morning must have had some impact someplace. I spent 10 minutes on that in the first hour of the program, or was it the second? Yeah, it was the second. It was the opening of the second hour of the program. And the Biden administration just announced, I mean, literally just announced that they are extending the pause on repayment of student debt from it, which was supposed to expire on the 1st of May or at the end of April, actually. You'd start having to pay back your loans starting in May. It's now going to run through the end of August, through August 31st. So that's interesting. Borrower balances, this is from CNN, borrower balances have effectively been frozen for more than 2 years with no payments required on most federal student loans since March of 2020. During this time, interest has stopped adding up and collections on defaulted debts have been on hold. So they're going to extend this to August 31st. And let's see. I mean, this August 31st is, it's followed by September 1st, the first day of September, which is really the beginning, the hardcore beginning, or the first week of September, after it's the end of summer vacation, and it's really the beginning of the fall election season. So maybe, we'll see, but maybe the Biden administration is planning on doing some sort of massive student debt relief starting in September or at the end of August, as the case may be. Time will tell, but keep an eye on this one. Hey, Marvin in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Marvin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Hey, I just want to talk to you about this student debt thing. The origin of student debt really started back with the Vietnam War, when students didn't have debt. A lot of students got out there and they protested basically the war, and they protested so much they basically did away with that war. They made a factor in the government getting out of Vietnam. So what happened was that it's a control measure. If you put young people and students like in debt, they won't protest because they owe something to the system, and they're scared to protest when they owe the system. So they basically don't protest. So when they start taking it from grants to loans, that was just a way to stop the young people from protesting the way they did in the Vietnam War. It's like a control measure.
You are absolutely right, Marvin. And Ronald Reagan said it right out loud. I mean, when he became governor of California, it was free to go to any University of California college. If you could get in, you paid no tuition. And Reagan undid that. He ended that. And when he was asked why, he said, "Why should I pay for these brats to protest my policies?" I mean, it's like he just came right out and said it.
I guess the only other thing I would say was a lot of things basically came from the lesson. I guess we would call them conservatives, that they learned from what went wrong from their point of view in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
It's like not showing you what really happens during war. You don't really get the detailed war coverage like you got in Vietnam, because that kind of stuff makes people protest.
Oh yeah, that's when George W. Bush embedded the reporters with the soldiers going into Iraq and Afghanistan, and so instead of seeing the horror of war, we were seeing kind of the glory of war. I'm with you, Marvin, and frankly, the Vietnam War didn't really start to turn until I think it was probably around 67. Maybe 68. I was just a teenager then. I don't remember the dates all that clearly, but it was around that time that the news reports started showing casualties coming out of Vietnam and started showing the horrors of Vietnam. And that was around the time that Walter Cronkite, went over there and they got the whole sales pitch from Westmoreland about how important the war was. And he came back and he said, "They tried to sell me the war." And the saying to this day is, when you've lost Walter Cronkite, you've lost America.
That's all I really wanted to say. I just think that's the reason why any president, whether Republican or Democrat, they have a difficult time canceling student debt.
Yeah.
Because they don't want a whole lot of young people in the streets protesting, especially the wars.
It may be. It may be that it was an intentional instrument of social control, and I think that you can build a case around that. And even if it wasn't an intentional instrument of social control, if it was just hey, greedy bankers wanting to make more and more money on higher and higher tuition, and colleges starting to want to pay their presidents multi-$100,000 fees and all that kind of stuff. Whatever it was, it has ended up being that. There are a lot of students who are scared to death, of getting kicked out of school and leaving in your second or third year of a 4-year program and not being able to get back in and still being stuck with the $50,000 in debt. So yeah, spot on, Marvin. Well said. Roger in Acme, Washington. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind?
Well, thanks, Tom. I'm all in on your corporate corruption message. And I wanted to suggest that Biden give a big speech and propose 2 bold anti-corruption actions via executive order.
Those being?
Well, the first is every entity that wants to do business with the government has to have a SAM number. And the executive order would be simply to say that if you have a SAM number, ipso facto, it is corrupt.
What is a SAM number? I've never heard of that.
Well, that's a number that's assigned by, I think, GSA. I'm not positive.
So in order to qualify to receive a check from the government, you first have to jump through a hoop that gives you a number. And this is in addition to your EIN, your employer ID number, which is like a company's social security number. You have to have this SAM number. Okay, I didn't know that. And thank you for informing me, Roger. So you're saying that in order to get that number to be eligible to cash a government check in the first place, you have to prove that you're not corrupt.
Yeah, well, that would be the executive order, right, that you have to, you cannot donate to politicians or political causes.
That would get struck down by the Supreme Court in 20 minutes. They'd say that's an infringement on these corporate persons' rights of free speech under the First Amendment.
Well, I don't think so. Not if if they have a SAM number, they're doing business with the government. But see, if Disney said to Boeing, I'm just pulling names out of the air. If Company A says to Company B, I'm not going to do business with you because you're giving money to politicians, they have every right to do that. But the First Amendment specifies the government may not limit free speech. And so if government says, if this corporation wants to give money to a politician, which the Supreme Court in 3 different decisions, Buckley versus Vallejo in 76, First National Bank versus Bilotti in 78, and Citizens United in 2010, and then arguably McCutcheon in 2013. In every one of those decisions, they said that giving money to politicians is a form of First Amendment constitutionally protected free speech. And if it's government that's withholding money as a result of that so-called free speech of giving money to politicians, that will go down in flames. First, you're going to have to overturn Citizens United. Well, I would say that as a campaign issue, President Biden ought to make that case.
Well, it could be done as sort of a moral issue, where as part of getting your SAM number or whatever, you get some kind of a score, and that score indicates how political or how corrupt you potentially are, and that becomes, it couldn't be used in contracting because, again, it would be considered a punishment. I'm not even sure if well, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. That was your first point. Was there a second one, Roger, real quick?
Well, yes, actually, that leads to the second one is that nonprofits are governed by IRS regulations, and the IRS regulations say you can use a certain amount, nonprofits can use a certain amount of their money for political consideration. And I would think IRS regulations could easily be changed by executive order again to deny any political activity by nonprofits.
Okay, I'm quite sure that would not be something you could do with executive order, because Congress passed the tax code, and Section 501c3 and 501c4 of the IRS code have to do with nonprofits that don't engage in politics and nonprofits that do engage in politics, and those are law. And you can't modify law with an executive order. You can only modify the way the law gets executed. The executive order could direct the Internal Revenue Service to pay more attention or less attention to something, but they can't say we're not going to follow the law, or we're going to completely ignore the law. But keep thinking, Roger. I like the way you're thinking. You're moving in some good directions there. Thank you very much for the call. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
What's on my mind is something I've been trying to talk to these Medicare groups about, what I think needs to be done. And Alex hit the point when he said, we need the public support. And I don't think reaching out to the politicians is going to help. I think we need to reach out to the public. And one of the problems with that is the public is so confused on health care. Right. They don't know that we don't need insurance. They don't know the difference between Medicare and Medicare Advantage. I think we need a big campaign to educate the people.
I agree.
Even if you try to do
Problem is, who's going to pay for it? I mean, Social Security Works is living on donations. You've got, the biggest organization that has the biggest pulpit is AARP. There's a couple of others, retirement based kind of, constituencies. But AARP makes most of their money from selling Medicare Advantage plans.
Well, we start small and grow, and then we get donations.
Yeah.
But we have to start somewhere because you just have to make this our goal.
Well,
they've taken
Social
over
Security Works has started somewhere, Susan. So I would say, it's easier, if nothing else, to go with an organization that has already started this work. So, go over to socialsecurityworks.org and check it out. I think you'll be really impressed. Susan, I got to run, but I think you said it very well that we need to be active. Get out there, get active, tag you're it, right? We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls on the other side of this break. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us. Yes, there are still some of us here. And welcome back. Let's see here, trying to catch the folks who've been sitting on hold for a while. John in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Oh, not much. Just had a short story about the Medicare Advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I run a small store in a place called Ostrander, Ohio, about 20 miles north of Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my regulars, it's right in the middle of Trump country. And one of my regulars, he comes in, and I constantly tell him that he's not on Medicare because he's on Medicare Advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other day he comes in and tells me that they're not paying for a test. It's like $1,500.
Whoa.
So he comes in the other day and tells me that Humana is telling him that they're not paying it because Medicare itself is not approving it.
Which is a lie.
Yeah, and that's what I keep telling him. I go, dude, you're being lied to. I go, you're not on Medicare. You're on Medicare Advantage.
Right.
I go, it's a private facility. It's just funny.
It's just a brand.
Yeah, isn't that just crazy, though?
Yeah, I think the easiest, if Congress wanted to pass a law to start, and I don't know, maybe I should write an op-ed about this. It might make a pretty good rant. That doesn't change anything financial at all. That all it does is says that the word Medicare may only be used to describe Medicare.
Right.
Because that was the big innovation in 2003. Medicare Part C, which was, private insurance plans that could replace Medicare, that goes all the way back to the 1960s. It was just always this little tiny slice of people of companies that were serving people in very unique categories of types of government employees who weren't eligible for Medicare for one reason or another. It was a niche market. And what they did in 2003 was they said, you may call the program that you offer under Medicare Part C, you may call it Medicare Advantage. And so that, and so I would say that they should make it so that any commercial reference to Medicare must refer exclusively to the actual Medicare program rather to any of these private programs. So people like your friend would know. He'd have Humana Elder Care. They'd have to come up with a new brand, right? They would call it Elder Care or Elder Care Advantage or, Old Farts Insurance or something. But they can't call it Medicare. And that would begin the process of educating Americans to the scam that has been perpetrated on them ever since 2003, ever since George W. Bush did this to us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it so funny, though, that they're...
Is he getting pissed off enough at Humana that he's ready to say, okay, that's it, I'm going to try and go back to regular Medicare?
Yeah, he is actually saying that. So.
Yeah. Well, good luck. He's going to have to wait until October of next year, and even then, he may find that the companies that sell the policies that fill the gap, the 20% gap, won't sell him a policy.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, it's like that door gets closed on you. Once you've been in Medicare Advantage for more than a year, it's a hell of a lot more difficult and sometimes, you know, functionally impossible to get back on real Medicare. John, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. What a great story. We'll be back. It's 51 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con and conservative. 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, just wanted to flag for you this amazing study that came out of the Department of Global Public Health at the University of Bergen in Norway. Lars Fadnes is the professor who oversaw it. They took a massive database of millions and millions of people all around the world, and the goal was to look at life expectancy. And they were looking at everything from pollution to wars to poverty to diet. And because there was so much data and such a large population base, they were able to separate out individual pieces. And what they found, and just looking at the diet piece of this, what they found was that going with what you and I might call the Mediterranean diet, they don't call it that in the study. What they basically say is no red meat, very little dairy, lots of fish, nuts, legumes as the principal protein sources, and lots and lots and lots of fresh fruits and veggies would add 10 years of lifespan to the typical 20-year-old and 8 years of lifespan to the typical 60-year-old. The whole video about it is over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Dylan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Dylan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, just wanted to sort of give you credit to the lizard people. I was young in the 90s, and one of my friend's dad used to talk about a bunch of conspiracy stuff. So the first thing was the Alex Jones had the conspiracy about Muslims basically attacking the Oklahoma City bombing with their Muslims. And then there was all these other stupid videos that he had us watch, but one of them was about the lizard people. And I don't know how many people actually believe that Bill Clinton, zipped on a suit from, being a lizard and zipped on a suit. But I do see there was a poll in 2013 that 4% of Americans do believe in lizard people. Like I said, I don't know how far that goes, but
4%? I'll bet it's higher 4%. Than that these days. I'm waiting for the lizard people conspiracy to infiltrate QAnon.
I think it probably already has. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it.
I mean, they go after just the wackiest stuff, just the absolute wackiest stuff. Dylan, thanks a lot for sharing that story with us. It's great. Great to hear from you. Thank you. Ted in Gold Beach, Oregon. Hey, Ted, thanks for listening to KXTO. What's up?
Hey, thank you so much. You mentioned it before or earlier in your show about how colleges, et cetera, they're much easier to get into as far as, to pay for it. I went to a land-grant college myself, Oregon State University, go Beavers. And in that day, I had the land grant, or not the land grant, but the Pell Grant. The National Direct Student Loans at that time were at a very low interest rate. And essentially what the government did, they saw this truly impoverished child who had a brain, sent him to college where I got a degree. And by doing that, I have paid back in taxes, several fold over what the government paid for me to go to school. But here's the thing that's really important in how I see it. It changed the trajectory of my progeny, my family. My son, he automatically went to college. He didn't even know he didn't have a choice, or that he did have a choice. It was automatically
because Dad did.
So precisely, yeah. It changes it changes the entire perspective. Now, where I work now, I was in public education. Now I work in with incarcerated individuals, and the statistics are overwhelming. That if you educate the incarcerated and that they when they are released, the prospect of recidivism is greatly decreased. It's totally overwhelming. And I really hope that people can see that. Now, there's another point I want to make, and then I know you got to go. Think about the marches that we witness. The Black Pride marches, Gay Pride, Women's Pride. You never see a poor pride march. Being poor, there's very little pride in that. And in fact, you're made to feel shameful. And not that we should all aspire to be poor, but what we need to do is to really look, how can we elevate people out of that generational poverty? And the key truly is education. And that is that there's more bang for the buck. So,
yeah, I would say that the two pieces of fixing poverty long term are, number one, giving people money so that they can get housing and food, and they can have a reasonable life that's not a life of horrible continual struggle, and number two, giving them education. And that provides the basis for it. Ted, brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing your story. It's a great story, and I appreciate the call. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Yes, all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. And don't forget to let Congress, let your members of Congress know what you think about the so-called privatized Medicare Advantage and whatnot. 202-224-3121 is the switchboard number for Congress if you want to share your thoughts with them. So have a great afternoon. Pray for peace. Be good to yourself and those around you. And we'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.